Hey everybody, it's Adam on my Think Club channel. I came across this clip. I listen to Scott Adams pretty regularly. I like the fact that he goes over the various political arguments that people are banding back and forth. And if you have been following Scott Adams, he's been asking for people to give him examples of systemic racism because it figures into a lot of the stuff that's going on with Black Lives Matter and, you know, the current climate in America. And he basically did an interesting take on an argument that I find rather persuasive. I was interested to hear his rebuttal to this argument when all he really did was dismiss it out of hand. I don't think he characterized the argument correctly. So I wanted to put out a quick video, just an unscripted video, to get your response on this, because I do find this argument rather persuasive. Now, the argument I'm going to lay out here ahead of time, and then I'm going to play Scott Adams' response to that. Obviously, I will interject. Scott Adams, in recent days, has been dismissing a lot of people and a lot of arguments that I feel are good arguments, and I'm not exactly sure why. But the argument that the left is making is that systemic racism exists. Now, I don't like that argument. I actually agree with Scott Adams that if you're telling people, especially black people or minorities, that systemic racism exists, the smart thing to do is not to try. Like, the argument is systemic racism exists. No matter how hard you try to succeed, you're not going to succeed because there's this thing called systemic racism that's getting in the way. That is a barrier to your success that you will never overcome. Therefore, trying is a waste of time. And I think it really demotivates a lot of people who would be motivated. So there is an argument that conservatives make that if systemic racism existed and it was strictly based on the color of your skin, that minorities that immigrated from other countries would experience this systemic racism. They're not raised here, so they don't necessarily believe that this systemic racism exists, and they're going to be more motivated to try. But if systemic racism exists, that motivation for them to try should meet that systemic racism and be stifled. They should not be able to succeed because obviously systemic racism is getting in the way. No matter how hard you try, the systemic racism is going to hold you back. So I find that to be a compelling argument because when you look at the data, the most the people that come over who are blacks and Latinos, they don't experience this systemic racism because they tend to succeed. They do very well here in America because they try very hard. Now, Scott Adams kind of dismisses this argument. He never really addresses it. I was super excited for him to bring this up because I thought Scott Adams is a smart guy. He will give us some insight here that we may have missed. So here's his characterization of the argument and his rebuttal for the argument. And spoiler alert, it's very anticlimactic. I wish he would give this argument a bit more thought because I think it is a good argument. And the argument is to battle this idea that systemic racism exists in America. That's the point of the argument.
There's an argument that I've been hearing that conservatives make that I think is weak. Now, you know me.
Okay, so he's starting off saying this argument is completely weak. Now, you've heard the argument. I've just made the argument. I'm saying, okay, that's good. I want to know, where are the weaknesses in this argument?
I'm not taking the left or the right side on things. I like to go with the argument. So it doesn't matter who's arguing.
See, this is why I listen to Scott Adams. He likes to go at the argument. He doesn't like to get caught up in the tribal bubble. He wants to assess the argument on its merits.
Argument it is. If it's weak, I want you to know about it. And the argument goes like this. So people will say, hey, the black community in this country is complaining about, economic equality, but, say the conservatives, how do you explain that the more recent black Africans who have immigrated more recently are doing far better economically? And so say the conservatives, it can't be because you're black, because the Africans are doing fine, but the people who have been here for a while are not. Now, of course, one argument to that would be there's a ripple of racism or disadvantage that's built into the system from slavery to today. That would be one response. But I think there's a far more obvious response, which is that if you're in another country, whether it's Africa or anywhere else, it's kind of hard to get to the United States. How do you immigrate to the United States? It's not easy. So first of all, you're going to be a capable person if you can even get to the United States.
So he's arguing that there's a selection bias going on here. And that's exactly true. There is a selection bias here. The most motivated people in the world are going to work as hard as they possibly can to get to the United States. So those people are going to get here absolutely motivated to succeed. They are still going to have black skin. That's the argument. The argument is that black skin and the systemic racism that exists in the United States should meet, and no matter how hard they try, they should not be able to succeed because the systemic racism is holding them back based on the color of their skin, not their work ethic. So that is the argument to address, Mr. Adams. Let's hear you address it.
Secondly, you probably have to demonstrate they have some education, that you can support yourself. I don't know exactly what the rules are, but my guess is that there's a self-selection process, right? Exactly. I'm seeing it in the comments. The people who are immigrating are self-selecting because they're motivated and ambitious, and they feel that the American system is suited for their ambition. If you told me,
see, it is suited for their ambition. That's exactly right. But what we're teaching people here in America is no matter how ambitious you are, there's this thing called systemic racism that is going to stifle that ambition no matter what you do. This tells people, don't try, give up. You can't succeed. You're already here, but you can't succeed because of systemic racism. That's the problem. If systemic racism doesn't exist, then this is good evidence that systemic racism doesn't exist, because these people come here and they don't, systemic racism doesn't stifle their ability to succeed. Explain the argument correctly, at least, Scott.
It doesn't matter what country they come from, doesn't matter what their ethnicity is. If you tell me I'm going to compare a bunch of people who made it to an entirely new country, learned a new language, and were so motivated they thought they would go across the world and fit into the system and work hard and succeed, that group's always going to do well. There shouldn't be any surprise that people who self-select for motivation, proper risk management, going to the right place.
So I feel there's a little bit of straw manning going on the left's argument here, because the left's argument is no matter how motivated you are to succeed, no matter what advantages you have, systemic racism is going to stand in the way based on the color of your skin. That's their argument. That's the argument that you have to fight against. You have to rebut. This is evidence that rebuts that argument. These people are extremely motivated, yes, but the color of their skin should stand in the way, and the color of their skin matched with the systemic racism in America should prevent them from succeeding. It doesn't. They succeed regardless of systemic racism. So either the systemic racism is there or it's not there. It's not standing in anybody's way. So I'm not exactly sure the argument that Scott Adams is making here. Is Scott Adams making the argument that there is systemic racism against people who are not motivated to succeed? Is that the argument that you're making? Because it seems like the lack of motivation would be what's standing in the way of them succeeding, not the color of their skin. I would make the argument, I've even heard Scott Adams make this argument, that we are demotivating people. We are taking away their motivation to succeed by this idea of systemic racism. And I myself believe that that's terrible. We're setting people up for failure because of this idea that systemic racism exists. It's the same exact thing as if you said, there is demons out there that will prevent you from succeeding no matter what you do. What is the point of trying? If that is the true nature of reality, trying is a fool's errand. We're setting these people up for failure.
Place where the energy is best. All of that is predictive of success. So it has nothing to do with ethnicity. It's a self-selected group who are motivated. Every self-selected, motivated group of any group is going to do pretty well compared to everybody else. So I would say that argument of, hey, what about the people who came recently from Africa doing well? It doesn't say what you think it says. Right? So I would.
It doesn't say what you think it says. That's his rebuttal. I don't know. I feel like I've laid out what I think it says. I don't think you understand what it says, to be honest with you. And I would like you to actually respond to the argument, because the argument, I feel, is a good argument. I mean, it's a good argument that this systemic racism is ever present, that this systemic racism is standing in the way of success. It's an argument against perpetuating the narrative that systemic racism will prevent you from succeeding, therefore you should not even try.
I would drop that argument, frankly.
See, he's saying he dismisses the argument out of hand. He just dismisses the argument out of hand without a real intelligent rebuttal, I would say. So I'll go ahead and leave it there. I'm curious as hell what your thoughts are. Obviously, this channel's been a great resource for getting your feedback. Leave that feedback in the comments below, and we will see you in the next video.